All right, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Aurea Rivera as our speaker for tonight's event. I am proud to say we will hear from someone who has experienced tonight's event theme, Unlocking Latino Student Success, because her life is a reflection of success earned through hard work and dedication. Aurea was born in Puerto Rico like many others. She made the journey to the mainland in pursuit of her dreams. She graduated from University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. A side note there from my notes here, we have a lot of Puerto Rican engineers from University of Mayagüez at Wright Pat Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. We have a huge number, and that pipeline continues to grow. And about 40 years ago, not with Aurea, I'm not going to give her age, but Grace Ramos and her husband started bringing these Latino engineers from University of Mayagüez. And they work for a unit there that collects all the intelligence for all over the world. And our Latino Puerto Rican engineers have been a great part of that to keep us safe. Aurea is a friend, and anytime I ask her to do things, she steps up. Like many of us here, we've always had that one person that helped us get to where we are. I had that person right here in Lorain, Ohio, Saul Torres. Aurea has been that person to many people around this country, in the Air Force, in NASA, and all over the place, especially with female engineers. Aurea Rivera. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with my Latino community tonight. I have to give many thanks tonight for the opportunity to come to Lorain, Ohio, and to the Lorain County Community College to participate in the Ohio Latino Gala Awards. That happens when you're short. Thank you, Ramon. And the Ohio Latino Gala Awards, I would like to congratulate the wonderful group of individuals that are recognized here tonight for being change agents for your communities, for your organizations, for the military services, and for our nation. Thank you to the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission and Mr. Tony Ortiz for the opportunity to share the stage with you tonight. Tony Ortiz, for some of you who may not know him, is like the Energizer Bunny. He can be in Cincinnati one evening and in Cleveland the next morning. Tony, I don't know how you do that, because I know, okay, I like to joke, but we have a father here tonight. So I'll be okay. No jokes, seriously, no jokes or political announcements are part of these remarks, unless the pursuit of happiness and equality is viewed as political, which in this case, then my remarks will be political. Of course, I could joke about religion, but I won't. Well, how do you get an 80-year-old woman to throw an F-bomb in a church function? Well, by having another woman, 80 years old, shout bingo. Okay, now that we're moving, okay, I'm gonna stick to engineering, I can see that. Okay, normally I will start my remarks going head first into baseball terms, which in the subject that I'm gonna be talking tonight. However, as a Puerto Rican woman, I will be remiss if I didn't share with you the impact of Hurricane Maria in my life. The immensity of this human tragedy will be for historians to capture because we're living its consequences today. For many of our Puerto Rican family, many, including some of you here in the audience, the only meaningful way of transportation from your community was via a boat or a surfboard. As an engineer and scientist, the satellite images of the before and after Maria brought the totality of the tragedy that Puerto Rico lived in that period. The world witnessed a U.S. territory transformed overnight into a third world country, where community infrastructure services like water, electricity, and gasoline became a bridge too far for everybody. Walking in the days, but walking, nevertheless, speaks of a resilient community. In biblical terms, Isaiah 61:3 speaks of those who mourn. The Lord will give you beauty for the ashes. As we look at the Puerto Rican flag tonight, we know that this promise indeed will come to pass. So, as we look at Latino youth and its empowerment, I will argue that empowering women will have to take place first. Enduring change comes as a result of institutional changes across government, industry, and academia. Enduring change will take place the moment we realize that our ability to continue to lead the world will be cemented on the shoulders of a society whose fabric is full of color and texture. Women and equality are areas close and personal to me, not because I'm a Latina woman, but because of the importance of diversity as a force multiplier for everything that we do. During my tenure as a senior civilian at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I witnessed the transformation of a male-dominated culture to one of inclusion. But even for them, there is always an opportunity to keep advancing and growing, or otherwise you become stale. Let me start with a little Dr. Seuss story. There is a fish and a cat that come together for a job interview. The interviewer receives a set of 5 vetted questions from their civilian personnel office. One attribute of the job is to be able to climb a tree. 2 doors down the hall, another set of fishes and cats get together to interview for another position. For this job, the key attribute is to dive to a depth of 100 feet and hold your breath for 10 minutes. Who has the advantage here? Okay, this is a portion, normally the audience participation will be sick, but I'm gonna get you off the hook tonight. The questions are the same, so there's equality of opportunity. What happens to the fish when climbing the tree is the only attribute the interviewer is going after? Or what happened to the cat when diving is the only requirement? When you're a woman and you're a minority in this society, you are the cat and the fish more times than we dare to admit. As we can see from the cat and the fish perspectives, the ideas of equality is not that we really mean when it comes to opportunity. As an engineer, I look at an equal sign, and when the conditions on both sides of the equations are the same, then we're okay there. But when we are managing the careers of real people, the probability that 2 backgrounds and experiential journeys are the same is really not that high. My goal for this presentation is to argue that a different model is required to achieve a better representation of women and minorities in positions of leadership. I will argue that our real pursuit is that of equity of outcomes. For females in STEM, the opportunity to reach positions of leadership have encountered many well-intentioned, but not only intellectually incorrect, but borderline buffoonery that perpetuates inequities of opportunity. We can all recall with incredulity the justification presented by Harvard President Lawrence Summers. in his infamous discussions of why women are poor at science and thus less capable of achieving tenure in colleges and universities. His argument, for those of you who may be too young to remember, was that biological differences and social norms account for the academic shortfalls of women in academia. Now, in English, Summers argued that there is a biological gene that makes women dumber when it comes to math and science. Add to that thought evidence of women's unwillingness to march down 80-hour weeks as a norm for their academic weeks as one of the examples used to justify the lack of critical mass when it came to tenure positions. It appears that 80-hour weeks is one equality attribute in the tenure discussions at colleges and universities that got nothing to do with delivery of results in the classroom. One more time, an example of the cat and the fish story. And of course, who will forget the Google engineer, James Damore, in his famous 10-page Google ideological echo chamber, where he, Damore, expanded the Lawrence Summers argument by attributing the inability of women to advance in STEM disciplines not only to biological differences, but to social conditioning and acceptance needs. From inability to serve in high-stress jobs due to anxiety to failure, to assert themselves in meetings, and on, the so-called women's shortfalls is endless, according to Mr. Damore. Of the script here. The only difference between him and the other Googlers is that this guy had the nerve to put this in writing, okay? The list is long on the root causes for the lack of female representation in leadership positions across Silicon Valley. Salary gaps are attributed to women's failure to negotiate salaries, as well as their alleged inability to speak up. It appears that Mr. Damore connects the fact of lack of career progression in STEM to gender differences. I assess Mr. Damore missed a few of the social science classes at his alma mater because clearly his arguments show the very common logical fallacy of confusing the concepts of correlation and causality. The difference between correlation and causality is relevant to this discussion. You can have two events that come together, thus showing correlation. Tyler Vergen, in his book, Spurious Correlation, shows some interesting examples of this phenomenon. The fact that we see a statistical correlation between U.S. consumption of chicken and total U.S. crude oil imports doesn't mean that importing more oil will mean that we're going to be eating more chicken. Another example of this fallacy, another example of this fallacy is the correlation between divorce rates in Maine and the per capita consumption of margarine. For causality to be true, you have to prove that the reduction in margarine consumption will result in happy couples and consequently reduction in divorce rates. Last but definitely not least, there is a correlation of the people who drown after falling out of the fishing boat to the marriage rate in the state of Kentucky. Okay, I know Kentucky is a little different, but even then, for causality to apply, you need to prove that a happy spouse will not throw their other half of the boat. Okay. This example, who said that math cannot be fun? Okay. These examples demonstrate that correlation and causality are indeed not the same. Now that you're armed with this understanding, not everybody got this, but now you got it. Now that you're armed with this understanding, let's go back and address the women and equality issue from a leadership perspective. Let's use Silicon Valley as our target population. Let me share with you 3 well-documented facts that speak of women, STEM, and equality when it comes to Silicon Valley. First, equally qualified women receive lower salary offers than men for the same job at the same company 63% of the time. Now, for women in the tech industry, they receive Under the age of 25, we're talking about young people here, earnings on average are 29% less than their male counterparts. And last but definitely not least, I'm going to give you the counter argument. Women hold only 11% of executive positions at Silicon Valley companies. Clearly, and this is the argument I'm respectfully making, women and minorities do not own their own career progression process. Leadership owns the process and have the responsibility of making the organizational changes required to ensure that we have a more diverse workplace from the mailroom to the executive suite. That said, there's always a way ahead, even for Ohio State football after Purdue. As leaders, we're placed in a unique position that can help shape our work environment for success. I would like to leave you with 3 recommendations that, in my professional experience, will help move the ball forward when it comes to this issue. First, establish a near, mid, and long-term horizon for the integration of women and minorities in positions of leadership. Your target goals will be based on a critical review of your leadership team and the demographics represented in the organization. Now, my military training comes here. In a strategy to task mode, recruiting, hiring, and retainment plans with supporting metrics will be needed to be thoughtfully designed to support the women increase in positions of leadership objectives. Number 2, identify an organizational champion to run the program at the executive level. And last, but definitely not least, keep line managers accountable by including an advancement of diversity initiatives as part of their yearly evaluation criteria. There is nothing that speaks louder than what? Than money on your pocket. In conclusion, meaningful and enduring change requires clear vision, courage, and a well-orchestrated action plan. The proposed strategy is one way of many that can open a path for a higher representation of women and minorities in positions of leadership across government, industry, and academia. Equity comes from a sense of equality of outcomes. Now, getting back to the beginning, unlocking Latino student success and the equality argument, using this image as our guide. Equality models ensure that every single individual receives equal access to the same number of boxes. That's what equality is. However, we as leaders will advance diversity in the workplace when we understand that the real question is, how do we ensure that every single person can have a clear vision of the playing field? Thank you.